talk on motivation, how to get started. Dr. Ashish Contractor spoke to all of you about the heart and its functioning. So maybe now we'll get into the heart of the matter. How do you get into distance running? What are the variables? How do you train yourself to be a distance runner? And it can get intensely technical, but for the most part, we'll try to keep it in a way that we share information as lay people. There are technical aspects to it. We'll come to it. Okay, what is endurance? It is nothing but the heart, the blood vessels, the lungs and the muscles working in consonance to deliver oxygen to the working muscles. The working muscles, remember that. In the case of running, it's your legs, to deliver oxygen to the working muscles and to take away metabolic waste or toxic matter away from it, right? So this is what endurance is about. The modes are running, cycling, swimming, skiing, dancing, skating. You have an intensity to it, frequency and a duration, as Dr. Contractor touched upon it briefly. In exercise science, like it is true for any form of exercise, it is even more important in the case of distance running that you take up three particular aspects of it which are, foremost. If you want to, let's say, run well into the evening of your life, you need to adhere to these principles, respect them. Whether you're strength training too, it's progressive overload. Progressive overload, this basically comes from a principle by Hans Selye, a Hungarian endocrinologist, who mentioned that when the body sees a stress, it reacts to the stress. Okay, it reacts to the stress by way of an alarm. It can be a physical stress, it can be an emotional stress, but the body's reaction is alarm. The next thing the body does is it gathers its systems together, whether hormonal or everything else, and picks up a resistance to the stress. You can adapt to this stress. If you're strength training and you're doing bicep curls, you overload them. After some time, your body can do maybe 12 reps instead of 8 reps, and then you go to another half a pound more and you can still do 8 reps and so on and so forth. So the body adapts in the resistance phase. The third phase is the alarming phase, which is called exhaustion. Okay, you load your body with stress so frequently and with such high levels that there comes a stage when the body cannot adapt. It gives up. So instead of getting a benefit from a certain kind of a physical activity, you actually retrograde. You go backwards, and this is a huge risk when it comes to running. And if you want to evolve truly as a good runner, as I said, well into the evening of your life, respect this principle of progressive overload, which means that you run and you decide for yourself what is the running load that you can take. The load is not necessarily the intensity. It has to do with how many times a week you will run and how far or how long will you run. Okay, every person has a capacity to take this kind of a load. It's in an individual's capacity to determine what that load is, and we'll tell you there are some very basic principles by which you can understand what happens to you when you are actually overloading it. And one of them, Dr. Contractor spoke to you about, is your resting heart rate. Okay, your resting heart rate is more or less a state of your well-being. You wake up in the morning, and even before you get out of bed, it's important that you check your resting heart rate if you are a distance runner. Okay, so true for any other sport, but more for distance running. And you keep track of it 3 to 4 times a week, and you get an idea of what your resting heart rate is when you are really feeling good. So let's say this resting heart rate is 70 beats per minute, and you're training for a half marathon or a 10K. In the course of your training, if on some days of the week there is a spike which is 15% or more, you have to understand that that's the day that your body gives you a signal and tells you that no adaptation has taken place from the run that you did over the last 2 or 3 days or yesterday's run. Okay, so it's a good idea to track this on a periodic basis every week and find out what happens to you. If it's 15% or more, you really shouldn't go out and do a speed workout. Maybe go out and do a run where you stop and smell the roses, okay? But no speed workout. So it gives you a signal. Progressive overload is taking your running in steps, understanding what the total weekly load should be in terms of the number of hours you put into it, or a lot of runners track distance, okay? But beginners should track the number of hours because distance is not so important as how long you are on the road on your feet. Specific adaptation. In the case of running, you need to take up adaptations or exercises and their intensities and types of workouts which help you to take running or distance running to the next level and the next level. So you need to do specific adaptation. If you are strength training, you do specific adaptation pertaining to using weights and doing bicep curls or bench presses or deadlifts or whatever. But in running, you make sure that whatever exercise form you take up or intensity or durations, they are specific to the science of distance running. And this is what I spoke about as optimal recovery. When your resting heart rate goes up, that's the time you tell yourself it's better to stay in bed, maybe have a cup of tea and read the newspaper than go out for a run, because your body is telling you that it has not recovered. Okay? You can feel, it's not the question of mild aches and pains, it's an overall sense, it's a check that you make on yourself as to how exhausted do I feel. And I'm sure as a runner, if many of you have been training, there are mornings when you feel quite hammered. It could be because of travel, it could be sleep deprivation, and compounded by the fact that you did a speed workout the previous day, but you get this signal that you've not recovered, better take optimal recovery. 10 laws of training. Important for you in distance running is to train all year round because you can lose endurance very rapidly if you take too many breaks. No long vacations kind of thing. You start gradually and train gently. Don't get into this mode of there are just 12 weeks remaining for the Goa River Marathon and somebody forced me to register and I'm going to train with this guy because he's done it twice before. So he's going to take you out on runs which are not really going to be in this particular domain of gradual and gentle. Okay, we're going to talk about what is RPE, is your rating of perceived exertion, and your heart rate. These are measures of how intensely you are training. Okay, heart rate, Dr. Contractor spoke to you about how it should be between 50% and 85% of your heart rate max. But I prefer with the runners that I work with to measure what we call as the rating of perceived intensity. Perceived exertion, which is a subjective scale. It's a 1 to 10 scale about how you feel on a certain day, and it's for the most part, as I believe, much better than your heart rate. Okay, your heart rate can have difficulties in terms of sleep deprivation, emotional stress, personal stress and stuff like that. It can be different on a certain day. But your rating of perceived exertion, the subjective scale by which you rate yourself on a 1 to 10 scale and say, today I feel 5 or 6 or 8, is something that won't change. Train for time first, for beginners, very important. Okay. Then for distance, and lastly for speed. Okay, so don't get into going along with friends and getting into a training program where they do speed workouts and you say, okay, these guys are doing 8 times 400 meter reps, seems to be a very nice, interesting thing. I think I can do that. That's not for you. Make sure that you start training for time first, which means basically going out in the morning for a run and saying, I'll run for 30 minutes. Remember that the distance is not important, the speed is not important. Going out for 30 minutes, which means an out and back route. You start from your house, run 15 minutes out and 15 minutes back, that's 30 minutes. It's not important how much distance you covered. Don't get into that mode of trying to find out what is your pace and what is your speed and comparing notes with runners. I see this happening very often in the running fraternity. It actually beats down runners because they then end up comparing their times. Make sure you just train for time first, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, 45 minutes. Going on a weekend, on a Sunday for a 1 hour, 1.5 hour or 2 hour run. okay? Not a 10K or a 12K or a 15K, that's what it means. Don't set your training schedule in stone. It means that even if you work with a coach and he's given you a training schedule, the coach will tell you that on days that you feel hammered, step back. It's not set in stone, okay? Alternate hard and easy days. This means that when we get into the later part of the presentation, you have speed workouts, you have long runs. You make sure that you don't do speed workouts on 2 consecutive days. You don't go for long runs on 2 consecutive days. Okay, you don't, for example, you're a half marathon runner and your long run is in the range of 15K, let's say to 18K. You don't run a 15K on Monday and then just because, on Sunday, and just because Monday is a holiday, you decide I'll do another 16K run on Monday. It's 2 hard days in a row, it's not good for you. Maybe you'll tolerate it once, twice, but at some stage your training is going to come to an end. Achieve as much as possible on a minimum of training. I like this the most, okay? Because there are enough runners around the place who talk about weekly mileages. I've done 70 kilometers a week this week. You know, my best week this month has been 85 kilometers per week. And that's when you end up comparing yourself and finding out that you are in that range of 40 kilometers a week. But that's really not bad. You are not less off than the guy who's doing 80 kilometers a week. It's just that his tolerance level is higher. That's what it requires him to evolve at his level. So achieve as much as possible on a minimum of training means that if you start out as a runner, you try to do your best with the minimum amount of training that you can do. Don't try to, bite on more than you can chew, is what it means. Prevent overtraining is just this. It's a corollary from here. We will talk about overtraining. It's a very huge problem in the running fraternity because, we spoke about it. Runners getting over passionate about it, and Dr. Contractor said that there are guys who don't feel too good and yet they say that, okay, I'm still going to go out and run, or I'm not able to push myself but I'm going to finish this race, and you go and push yourself. So in a different sense, this domain of overtraining is just that. There are enough runners who start training with a huge amount of passion and intensity and going over the brink. Resting once a week is a non-negotiable thing. In any fitness industry, resting once a week is absolutely essential. It's like whatever, keep holy the Sabbath day. Sunday is supposed to be the day of rest, at least amongst Roman Catholics, but that's just what it means. You need to rest once a week. Keep a detailed log book because this is going to be a guideline as to whether you're progressing or regressing, okay? And make sure you set realistic goals. Don't start, you haven't even run a 10K and then somebody comes and tells you, I think you're in shape to do a sub 2 hour half marathon, and then you decide that you're going to set that as your goal to achieve in whatever 24 weeks. It might not happen if you don't have that ability, okay? Medical clearance, PAR-Q we spoke about, the requirements, running shoes, get yourself a good pair of running shoes, preferably branded because they are going to be made for running. A stopwatch is very essential. I'm not one of those people who encourage runners to buy garments and other bells and whistles, but I think that the stopwatch is something that you need in order to keep track of the time that you ran. And for the most part, I think that if you train yourself on that rating of perceived exertion, it's your inner GPS which will do a lot of good for you. Okay, appropriate clothing, runner's clothing, you all know it. Make sure you select safe running routes. You know that you're going to be a road runner, so you're going to run on the road. Select a safe running route, let somebody know where you're running, find out emergency services because anything can happen. It's either an accident or some kind of problem for you. Use a training program, don't just run blind. And use a training program that sets a goal. Okay? Goal of training. Our intent is to improve blood and oxygen transport to the working muscles, which means that your cardiac output is going to go up. You are going to have enzymatic activity in your body which is going to improve the rate at which oxygen is utilized by your working muscles. You have certain powerhouses inside the cellular structures of your muscle called mitochondria. Okay, it's a technical term, but basically it's the place where, it's the furnace where you actually burn your fat and carbohydrate, right? Our intent in training is to shift what we call as the lactate turn point. We'll talk about this. It's a very important concept for you to be able to evaluate what kind of a runner you are, what is your capacity in terms of doing the full marathon or your 10K and things like that. The lactate turn point is a very, very important variable. Increasing VO2 max, we touched upon this in the previous presentation briefly. VO2 max is basically the maximum amount of oxygen that, irrespective of you breathing it in, it has to be absorbed into your bloodstream by way of the fact that you have to have enough hemoglobin. Gas exchange has to take place in your lungs. That oxygen gets transported via the heart to your working muscles, the legs. Inside the working muscles, the cellular structures have to actually utilize it, right, to generate energy, which is going to allow you to propel yourself forward. Okay, not everyone can do this efficiently. We are all built differently. There's a huge range from being, let's say, very weak runners in the range of, I'm just giving you examples of having a VO2 max of 30 milliliters of oxygen per kilogram per minute, okay, kilogram of your body weight per minute, to what Haile Gebrselassie is supposed to be around 82. Okay, so that's the range we are talking about. So VO2 max is a variable which largely determines your capacity to be able to, how fast you can run a full marathon. Improving running economy. This is a very important concept because I like to compare it with VO2 max, and you will see why I am doing it later. Okay, you can have a low VO2 max, but you can have a high running economy, and you can actually beat the guy in a race who has a higher VO2 max than you. Okay, it's just something, an analogy is that you have two cars, one has a larger engine, other has a smaller engine, but the smaller engine car is much more efficient. Both of you end up, let's say, driving for 20 kilometers, but the fuel consumption in the smaller engine car is much more efficient. So you can have a smaller engine, you can have a lower VO2 max, but if you work on your running economy, you can still beat a guy who has a higher VO2 max, or you can surprise people with the kind of timings that you do in your races. Okay, the goal of training is to increase your fuel storage, as we spoke about carbohydrates, right? Carbohydrate is stored in the form of glycogen. There is a limited amount of glycogen, as you've seen there. 2000 calories is what we spoke about, right? 20 miles is what you can run, and after that you deplete it and you hit what we call as the wall. So the intent is to increase this fuel storage because beginner runners don't have 2000 calories. They have much less than that. Sedentary people have much less than that. Okay, we're talking about, if you say grams of glycogen, a sedentary person has it in the range of maybe around 280 to 300 grams. An elite runner will have about 750 grams. Okay, a sedentary runner who trains himself for in a distance running program can move from 300 to something like 500, 550. So increasing fuel storage is the objective of training. When we do exercise programming, we are going to do all of this: aerobic, speed, you need strength, surprisingly, which most runners neglect, flexibility, and nutrition, which Ryan is going to speak about next. Basic components of a training schedule, that's where we get into the meat of the matter. I've given you an example of how to work on a 6-month training program. Okay, what you need to do is base training in the first 6 weeks. You will work on your strength and speed in the next 12 weeks. You will do what is called as sharpening before the race, in terms of really getting the razor's edge in terms of readiness for your race. You will do what is called as a taper, which means that you've now done all the hard work. You need to bring your body down to a resting level and not have those aches and pains which you had in training, so that you're primed and ready to be at the start line. Okay, so it's a 6-month training program. An example, it doesn't need to be a 6-month program, it can be anything else depending on where you are at the starting point and what your coach perceives you as being able to do. Okay, so What is base training? Base training is nothing but slow and gentle running. Okay, that's the best part about base training. It's the evolution of the runner where he learns to enjoy running. It's not the place where you end up hammering a runner, getting him to do speed workouts, getting his heart rates up to 85-95% of the heart rate max in speed workouts, and then he gets miserable wondering what he's gotten into. But this is the most enjoyable part of running. Get into base training, which means going out 3 to 4 to 5 times a week for gentle runs. And I always use the word stop and smell the roses because that's what the run is meant to be. You go out, you don't look at the road, you look at the scenery. You don't look at your watch because the timing is not important, okay, of what pace you're doing is that's what I meant. What is important is you tell yourself, I'm going to go out for 20 minutes and going to come back 20 minutes back home. That's your run. That's base training. No stress on pace, no stress on distance. So go out for a run 3 to 4 times a week. You decide one of those runs on the weekend has to be a long run, which means that if you're a beginner runner, let's say typically you're not able to hold running for more than 25-30 minutes, start with 30 minutes, let's say Tuesday, another 30 minutes on Thursday, and if you are able to run only 3 days in a week, then Saturday is your long run. Instead of 30 minutes, you push yourself to go for 45 or 50 minutes. How do you push yourself to go for 45 or 50 minutes and yet stop and smell the roses? Very simple. You were able to run only 30 minutes, but how do you go to 45 minutes? You extend that 30 minutes to 45 minutes by taking walk breaks, okay, in your run. Make sure you run for 5 minutes, walk for 2 minutes, run for 5 minutes, walk for 2 minutes. You will be able to do 45 minutes and complete the run, and still you will have that basic elevated heart rate. This is typically training which is done in the region of around 60-65% of your heart rate max. Okay, which means that it is also what we call as conversational pace. If you are running alongside your companion, you are able to hold a conversation without gasping for breath. That's the pace we are talking about. Okay, not a pace at which you are both trying to have a conversation and both are unable to speak. Conversational pace. If you have nobody running alongside you, which is really what can happen most of the time because running is a solitary activity, you try to recite a poem that you know very well. If you can recite that poem without gasping for breath, it means you're running at the right speed. Okay. So what does base training do and why do we do this as the first phase of training? It brings something called capillarization. It makes sure that the number of blood vessels reaching your thighs, calves and hamstrings are evolving into a larger network. Okay, capillaries are more, which means that muscle is going to get supplied by more blood over a period of time. So that's why base training is important. Fat metabolism. We spoke about carbohydrate and fat being sources of energy. When your running intensity is low, as in conversational pace training, you are actually going to be burning a lot more fat than carbohydrate. Okay, so you're not going to get depleted of carbohydrate. You're not going to hit the wall in your training, kind of thing. But you're going to make sure that you encourage fat metabolism. Why fat metabolism? Because there is an unlimited store of fat literally in our bodies, and we can use that store, and it allows you to run for long. Okay. Physiological and psychological preparation for the next phase. What you're doing now is you're running every week, 3 to 4 times a week, and making sure that you're preparing yourself in terms of your ability to handle runs, so that when you get into the next phase, which is the speed workout phase, you are ready, you are primed, you have that elevated aerobic ability now to be able to take up speed work. You can't launch yourself into speed work if your legs are not ready for it. This is what prepares your legs. This is what prepares your heart. Increasing the number and size of mitochondria, which I spoke about, the powerhouses inside your cell, they multiply and grow. So you are able to use a lot more oxygen which you had inhaled as compared to earlier. Increasing enzymatic activity. This is because in metabolic processes you need enzymes to break down the carbohydrate or the fat. Your enzymatic activity goes up as you begin to train like this. And overall, as we spoke, lifting your aerobic base. In structuring a training schedule, I'm showing you here how to do it. You have your days of the week and you have the number of weeks. So The intent is, when I say optimal recovery and progressive overload, is that let's say you're doing 60 minutes walk run on Saturday. You go to 70 minutes walk run on the next Saturday. It means you are giving yourself an overload, right? Now, for your body to adapt to this overload from 60 to 70, you need to make sure that you allow time for adaptation, like we spoke about Hans-Selye's general adaptation syndrome. You allow that time by making sure that the following Saturday you drop your run to 60 minutes. If you go from 60 to 70 to 80, I spoke about the exhaustion phase, you are going to break down. Okay? So this is an example of it, that you run for 60 minutes on Saturday, the next Saturday 70 minutes, drop it back to 60. Bump it up to 80, drop it back to 60. You allow your body time to recover and adapt. Okay? Next phase, speed and strength. We'll speak briefly about what these do for you. Strides, hill running, marathon pace, lactate threshold, VO2 max, repetitions, plyometrics and core. Very important for you. Okay? Strides. The simplest form of speed workout that I recommend to runners is that you go out for a gentle run. At any point of time, you decide, I'm now going to zip a little bit, which means not an all-out sprint like you would do at your school races, but I'm going to start moving fast. You decide at any point of time, there's a tree coming up, you say, when I cross that tree, I'm going to start running fast. You run fast, you can feel that zip, you can feel your legs moving fast. Hold it for about 40 meters only, okay? Just to give yourself that bump in speed. Hold it for 40 meters and slow down after that. Come back to conversational pace of running, okay? After a while, you come up to an electric pole, you tell yourself, from this pole I'm going to start running again. You do the same thing. Strides are nothing but 40 to 60 meter controlled sprints incorporated within your easy run. And you do around 10 to 12 of these, you get your first taste of what a speed workout is, okay? Hill running. All runners need to develop leg strength, okay? And as runners, if you don't have access to a gym, it's very easy, and Ali will probably corroborate that you can build strength using your body weight, okay? And one of the ways to build leg strength is to do hill running. You pick an incline which is about 150 to 200 meters long only, and there are many inclines in and around the place in Goa for you. Runners in Bombay usually have to pick a flyover early in the morning on which they can do this because there are no hills around the place. Okay, so 150 to 200 meters of uphill incline, okay, not too steep, not too gentle, but a challenging incline, and you zip up it again at a very controlled pace, such that at the end of that 150 to 200 meters, you can feel that you're probably maxing out in terms of heart rate. So you're giving yourself not only a cardiovascular thump, but your legs, in trying to pull your body weight up this incline, at some point of time are going to develop quads and hamstrings, which will probably allow you to move around at a swimming pool in shorts and show them off. Okay? Lactate threshold. What is lactate threshold? A very important term, but seldom understood by runners. Your body, when it burns carbohydrate, has an intermediate compound called blood lactate. And this compound, if you keep on increasing the intensity of your run, the blood lactate entering your bloodstream keeps on going up. Okay? At a certain point of time, it interferes with the contractility of your muscles and forces you to slow down, which is what you feel as the burn in your calves when you try to run too fast, too soon, or all the time. Okay, this lactate, it increases, but if you keep your speed at a controlled speed meant for you, it can remain steady. That is, blood lactate is thrown into the bloodstream, but it's also cleared out by your bloodstream. So there's a production and there's a removal. Okay? If you increase your speed, as I said, continuously, there's a production, but there's less removal. So it accumulates in your bloodstream. When it accumulates in your bloodstream, it interferes with excitation couplings in your muscles, and you're not able to get your muscles to move, they tell your body to slow down, and at some point of time you will come to a standstill. Okay, so blood lactate threshold is that point at which the blood lactate just about starts increasing in your bloodstream, which means that you keep your speed at such a value that it's produced and cleared. So you're at that point. Why is it important? Because that's the speed close to where you will be running your marathon. A little slower than that. So when we work on the lactate threshold, you work on elevating it, okay? Which means that if today, I'm giving you a quantified example that usually the lactate threshold is around 3 millimoles per meter, 3 millimoles per minute in your bloodstream. Let's say that your speed is 10 kilometers per hour. By training close to the lactate threshold, that same 3 millimoles per minute, you can run at 11.5 kilometers per hour. So what you've done, your body has been adapted to training a speed of a higher value for the same blood lactate. So that's what is important, and that's what's going to take your marathon times into better positions, better finish times, better half marathon times, better 10K times. Okay? VO2 max is, as I said, the maximum oxygen consumption by your body. It's really close to your heart rate max. We usually test people, as was told in the previous lecture to you, that you're made to run or you're made to bicycle until you reach exhaustion. That's VO2 max, close to 95% of your heart rate max. Repetitions, these are repeats of 200 meters, 300 meters or 400 meters at this VO2 max speed meant for you. So you're training also your heart rate to be able to handle higher heart rates for a shorter duration of time, and making sure that your overall fitness level or your heart's ability, cardiac output, the cardiac muscle growing in size, its pumping capacity improves when you are doing these kind of workouts. Plyometrics and core is, I believe, a non-negotiable part of a runner's training. You must be able to do. Plyometrics is basically power. Whatever you see, the jumping motions, jumping jacks, squat jacks and squat jumps, lunges and things like that. These are power exercises. Finally, what are you doing in running actually? You are propelling your body weight by way of self-locomotion. With every step you want to propel it forward, right? So what's that? It's that when you take a step, with that step you have to propel yourself forward, which means that you're actually jumping forward in the broader sense. If you're not able to jump well, okay, if you train your body to be able to jump higher and higher, your capacity for being able to release the elastic energy in your Achilles tendon is going to get better. So you need to train yourself for plyometrics too. You need to train yourself for a core. The core is your abdominals, your back, your glutes and your hips. This is the musculature, which is the tight musculature which holds your whole body intact, and really speaking, that's the place from where all force originates. So if you have a strong core, you don't slouch like a dead person or a shuffling old man in the finish of your marathon. Your core is good enough to hold you through that distance. So a strong core is also very important. Okay? So strides in hill running, we spoke about what strides are, we spoke about hill running. Some of the things you'll do in terms of hill running, which is good for beginners, is that you learn to run on your forefoot. When you run uphill, you never land on your heel, if you notice. And that's what we want runners not to do. Learn not to land on your heel, because the shocks going up through your ankles, knees and to the hips are likely to give you injuries more and more. It's different that shoes are made and cushioned to allow you to land on your heel, but learn to land on what we call as the midfoot, which is neither the heel nor the forefoot. But here in hill running, you are forced when you go uphill to land on your forefoot. Okay? Power and strength develops in your stride. Because you're running uphill, your stride gets shortened. You cannot overstride when you run up a hill. Okay? Your stride shortens, which is a good thing for you because your leg turnover goes up. And running economy. The fact that you are able to run uphill, your stride shortens, you're going on your forefoot, this itself creates what we call as an efficient form of running for you. You end up evolving as a more efficient runner. In structuring the training schedule, we already had the long runs on Saturday. Now we have, you do hills, okay? Then you do repetitions. You do hills, you do repetitions, you do hills. This is as the week goes by. Check what happens before and after. I am making sure that you are not training the next day in running. You spend time in doing strength training. Maybe go to a gym, maybe stay at home and do a couple of push-ups, squats, lunges. So you're not running. So there is no cardiovascular activity. As I said, optimal recovery, right? Progressive overload, which means that you do hills, the next day you don't run. The next day you jog for 45 minutes easy, you rest or cross train before your long run, and then you do your long run on Saturday. We spoke about the lactate threshold, blood lactate turn point, and this happens in elite runners at more or less the 16K. If they were told to run an all-out 10 miles, okay, before which they will start feeling the burn in their calves, they would do a 16K. But a beginner runner, the lactate threshold, when you really run at lactate threshold pace, would do 1 hour of running. And in that, he would cover anywhere between 10 for a slower runner to maybe about 13, 14 for average runners. Okay. VO2 max, we spoke about this, it's the maximum oxygen delivery in milliliters of oxygen per kilogram of body weight per minute by your working muscles. Okay. And this VO2 max is usually, if I were to tell you to run a 5,000 meter race, you would have to do it close to 95% of your heart rate max if you were doing it at an all-out capacity. Okay. So what do we do here? In the training schedule, we now shift from hills and repetitions to doing another phase of VO2 max running, which means running at your 5 kilometer pace and running at a lactate threshold pace on alternate weeks. Okay, so 1 week VO2 max, next week lactate threshold, next day VO2 max, next day lactate threshold, and make sure you take recovery days in between these workouts. Okay. So when you reach a stage of being an accomplished runner, a guy who's been running for quite some time, you are then in position to be able to handle 2 speed workouts in a week. Okay. First, as a beginner, you never do speed. You just do base training. Next, as a runner, we tell you that you should do only strides. What I spoke about, 40, 50 meters of sudden zips. Next phase is that you are able to handle hills and repetitions and lactate threshold and VO2 max. But you are able to handle hills, you are able to handle VO2 max on Thursdays, and you are able to handle a long run on Saturdays, which means that your body has now adapted in such a way that you can handle 2 speed workouts and 1 long run. Energy burning happening in your cells, which doesn't depend on oxygen, and you can do it only for a short period of time, and those are the repetitions that we are speaking about. 100, 200, 300 and 400 meter repetitions. And just wanted to show you that you have base training, okay, in which you are doing general adaptation runs. There is no particular pressure on you to run for time or speed. Base training followed by speed, which means that you do 3 times a hill workout, go for a 30-minute lactate threshold, or as we call it as a tempo run. You do 4 times 800 meter repetitions at your VO2 max pace, which is your 5 kilometer pace. You do 4 times hill, which means that you progress from 3 times to 4 times, which means what I said, progressive overload. Okay, you go for a 35-minute tempo run, you go for 5 times 800 meters, you go to 5 times hill, so on and so forth. You allow your body to adapt. Okay, rest days after the speed workout, general aerobic runs, long runs on the weekend. Okay, in between you can do for yourself a 5K time trial or a 10K time trial, just to see how much better you are getting. That is, you define for yourself by measuring a course which is exactly 5 kilometers or 10 kilometers and do it at your best ability. It will tell you over a period of time that you are shaving off minutes. If you did the 5K in 30 minutes, you end up doing it in maybe 28.5 when you do it after 12 weeks. Okay? The time trials are meant to find out what's happening to you in terms of improvement. And we do various kinds of time trials. You can do 15K time trials, 12K time trials and things like that. In the sharpening phase, we try to make sure that we run into repetitions. This is very intense running. We make sure that your total load, weekly load, is reduced now. Let's assume that for numerical examples, you were doing 60 kilometers a week. Now we bring you down to 40 kilometers a week, but we up the intensity, which means that you're really zipping at anaerobic pace, which is close to your heart rate max, as well as not allowing enough oxygen to go into your muscles, depleting it. Okay, we do reps, we do tempos, reps, tempos, reps, tempos. This is sharpening, which is razor's edge training before your race. Okay, and the last phase is called the taper, in which you drop completely. You see that you'll get more rest. You just do a brief tempo of 20 minutes. You get rest again. You do a medium long run. You get rest. Just one speed workout, rest. General aerobic run, rest, and then your marathon. So you will see that in these 2 weeks, your training load has dropped substantially. Okay. What I have put here are the long runs for a full marathon runner. 32 kilometers, 20 miles, hitting the wall. Okay, 2000 calories. Your body should be trained to go to this distance of 32 kilometers a couple of times so that you know what's happening to your body. As I said, you need also strength training. You can either do it in a gym or you can do Tabata and boot camp training, in which you do jumping jacks, you give yourself time intervals. This is also a very good strength and power exercise. 20 seconds of jumping jacks followed by 40 seconds of a less intense thing like crunching. Then 20 seconds of doing a squat thrust and stand up, prone plank, mountain climbers, windscreen wipers. These are things that you learn if you train with a coach, or sometimes we've done this with a couple of runners in Goa. Okay, upper body strength, and you can do boot camp, which is continuous 15 seconds on, 15 seconds rest kind of real army kind of training. Okay, mountain climbers, Russian twist, squat thrust and stand up. So you have some picks here about things that you've seen. A tuck jump is when you jump and bring your knees very close to the chest. The push-up is something you know. The squat is something you know. The mountain climber is being in a racing starter's position and rapidly moving your legs for leg turnover. You've seen the tricep dip, you can do it against a park bench. You see the glute bridge, which really builds up your butt if you were to hold this position and lower yourself and bring yourself back up. The jumping plank, in which you hold the plank position and lift your feet off the ground, and you get real leg strength with this. You have Supermans, in which you lie on your stomach and you raise your hands and your legs periodically up and down. Okay, so just to give you an example, that these are the things that you probably need to do. These are box jumps, in which from a static position you jump up onto a box, and this is where this leg power comes from. If you were to build this kind of leg power and leg strength, you naturally end up evolving into a faster runner. Lunge jumps. You lunge, you spring up explosively, alternate your legs and land on the other side, in the other position. Okay, so lunge jumps. You need real power for this, and if you develop this kind of power, there is no two ways about it. You're going to become a better runner. Star jumps, in which you squat, you jump up into the star position, land back up. Jump squat, prisoner style. Your hands behind your head. You squat down, explosively move up. So, as I said, this is, as I believe, an non-negotiable part of your training. You just don't run every day or every week. You make sure that you strength train too. You end up becoming a more evolved runner, a stronger runner, with less chances of getting injured. Overtraining syndrome, very briefly. Okay, you must make sure that these are the physical signs and symptoms of overtraining for you. If you are training and you don't know what's happening to you, please monitor these signs. Elevated resting pulse rate is what I spoke about. You will get minor infections, increased susceptibility to colds and flus, especially when you keep getting into speed workout phases because your body still probably can't handle the adaptation. Chronic muscle soreness, chronic meaning every day you are sore. It's not like just that one day you are sore and then you recover. Okay? Exhaustion which lasts day long, lethargy, weight loss which you can't explain by what you have just merely running with. This weight loss happens because you are really slamming your body, overtraining, appetite loss, insatiable thirst and dehydration, intolerance to exercise. There's one stage when you come and you tell yourself, I don't want to do any marathon running from tomorrow onwards. Okay, decreased performance, which means that your times in those time trials that I spoke about, you go from 30 minutes, suddenly you find that the 5K is in 33 minutes. What happened to you? Overtraining. Okay, delayed recovery from exercise. When you needed 1 day to recover, you now need 2 to 3 days to recover. Psychological signs, fatigue, tiredness, drained of energy, reduced ability to concentrate, apathy or no motivation, okay, irritability, anxiety, depression, you get headaches, insomnia, you suddenly find you can't sleep enough at night, okay, inability to relax and jittery. These are real signs of overtraining. Please make sure that you monitor this if you're going to self-train or take some schedule off the internet. Make sure that you're at least monitoring signs for this. That's it. Thank you.